My name is Reed Barker. I'm 32, and until about a month before everything changed, I thought I had the kind of life that was easy to describe at dinner parties. I design acoustic spaces for a living, recording studios, small concert halls, the occasional church that wants its choir to sound like something worth the drive. It's technical work. You have to understand how sound moves through a room the way a plumber understands water. I like that. It's precise. It doesn't leave a lot of room for ambiguity. I'd been working with a studio in Austin for almost 4 years when the owner called me on a Tuesday morning and told me he was shutting down. Not selling, not restructuring, shutting down. His wife was sick, and he was going back to Minnesota, and he was sorry for the short notice. I told him not to worry about me. I meant it and didn't mean it at the same time. 3 days later, a colleague forwarded me a job listing from a music label in Nashville called Harlow Records. They were renovating their main analog recording space. Old building, bad acoustics, the kind of room where you could hear the pipes in the walls during quiet passages, and they needed someone to oversee the work. 6-month contract. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it was something, and something was what I had. I said yes the same afternoon. Drove to Nashville the following Saturday with my truck half-packed and a short-term rental booked through an app that, as I found out at 8:30 that night, standing on a street in East Nashville with my phone in a bag, did not actually exist. The listing was gone. The money was gone. Customer support sent an automated message that said my case was under review. I sat on the tailgate of my truck and called every number I had. A friend of a colleague, a studio musician I'd met once at a session in Baton Rouge, texted back within 20 minutes. He said his old roommate had a spare room in her apartment. He sent a number. He said, and I remember this exactly because it stuck with me later. She's particular, but the room is real and the rent is fair. I called. She picked up on the second ring. Her voice was matter-of-fact, the way people sound when they've already decided not to be surprised by things. I explained the situation. She was quiet for a moment. She said, "Come look at the room. If it works, fine. If it doesn't, at least you're not sleeping in your truck." Apartment 4B was on the 3rd floor of an older building on Fatherland Street. Dark wood floors, high ceilings, a window at the end of the hall that caught the orange light from the street below. She opened the door before I could knock twice. Quinn Ellery was 28, dark-haired, wearing a gray t-shirt and jeans, holding a glass of water in her right hand. Her left hand was at her side. It took me a moment, not because I was staring, but because the rest of her was so still, to notice the way her last 2 fingers curved slightly inward at rest, like her hand had learned to hold a shape it hadn't chosen. She looked at me the way people look at things they've already made a preliminary judgment about. "The room's 12 by 10, she said. "Closet small, bathrooms shared. I work from home, which means I'm here during the day, which means noise is a problem." She paused. "I've had 3 roommates in the past 14 months. None of them lasted." I shifted my bag on my shoulder. What happened to them? They couldn't adjust. She moved back so I could see down the hall. "Don't touch the upright piano without asking. Don't play music through speakers in the common areas after 9. Don't leave dishes in the sink overnight." She turned and looked at me directly. "And don't look at my hand like it's something to comment on." "Okay," I said. She narrowed her eyes a little. "That's it? No questions?" "I can ask about the closet space if you need more material." Something moved across her face. Not quite a smile. More like the beginning of one that decided it wasn't the right moment yet. "Closet's on the left," she said. "Move-in's first of the month, or now if you need to." I moved in that night. The piano was an upright Yamaha against the wall between the living room and her bedroom. It had seen better years, some keys with a faint yellow tinge, a couple of low notes slightly off pitch. But it was in the apartment the way certain things are in a space, not decorative, not incidental, present, the way a tool is present when someone uses it every day. I didn't touch it. The first few mornings we moved around each other, like 2 people who had agreed on the floor plan, but hadn't settled the furniture yet. She made coffee early, left the pot on. I poured mine and took it to the small table where I spread out my work drawings. She sat at her desk, a wide one she'd built from 2 sawhorses and a hollow core door, with her laptop and headphones and stacks of handwritten pages. I noticed things without meaning to. The way she held her coffee cup in both hands, the left curled around the right, supporting rather than gripping. The way she typed with 9 fingers, the left pinky resting off the keyboard at a slight angle. The way she sometimes stopped mid-sentence while writing and slowly flexed her left hand, like she was running a diagnostic she already knew the result of. I didn't say anything about any of it. She'd told me not to, and beyond that, it wasn't my story to ask about. What I didn't expect was how much she knew about my work. On my fourth day there, I left some acoustic panel samples on the kitchen table, different densities, different surface materials, because I was heading back to the label that afternoon and wanted to compare them in better light first. When I came back, they were arranged differently. She'd grouped them by absorption coefficient, thinnest to thickest, with a sticky note on one that said, "This one will flutter at high frequencies in a live room." I looked at the note for a long time. That evening I asked, "How do you know about flutter echo?" She didn't look up from her screen. I've spent a lot of time in recording studios. As a musician? A beat, as a writer, mostly. I looked at the panel she'd flagged. The note was correct. "You're right about this one." She finally looked up. "I know." After that we started talking more. Not personal things, not at first. Technical things. She asked about the Harlow renovation, what they were doing to the ceiling, whether they were keeping the hardwood floors, how they planned to handle the flutter in the back wall. She had opinions. Strong ones. She knew the room I was describing because she'd recorded there once, a long time ago, and she remembered exactly where the low end stacked. "They need to address the parallel walls before everything else," she said. "Everything else is just decoration if they don't." "That's already in the plan." She nodded. "Good." The way she said it, she sounded like she was approving something she'd been waiting on. About 2 weeks in, I heard her playing. It was past midnight. I was still at the kitchen table going over specs, and the sound came through the wall. Not loud, just clear, the way sounds move through old buildings at night when everything else goes quiet. She was playing slowly. There were stops and restarts, passages that broke off mid-phrase, the kind of playing that sounded like a conversation with yourself rather than a performance, like working something out that kept resisting. Then there was a stretch of maybe 5 minutes with no stops at all. Just the music moving forward, complete, and I set down my pencil and sat still and listened. Then it stopped. Long silence. Then again from the beginning, slowly, with the stops returning. I didn't say anything the next morning. I didn't say, "I heard you last night." I didn't say that was good. I had the feeling that mentioning it would be like knocking on a door someone thought was closed. She eventually started leaving her work visible when I walked past her desk. Not an invitation, just a withdrawal of the effort to hide it. I took that as a small thing, which it was, and also as the only version of a larger thing she was ready for yet. The night things shifted, it was raining. The kind of rain Nashville gets in March that sounds like it's settling an argument with the roof. Quinn was already at the kitchen table when I got back from the label, mug of tea gone cold, staring at the wall. Only the light above the stove was on. "Bad day?" I asked. "Is that a personal question?" "It's a question about whether I should make more tea or just go to my room." She looked at the mug. More tea would be fine. I made it and sat across from her and waited. Sometimes people need someone to wait. Not a prompt, not a question, just the acknowledgement that time exists to be filled. Eventually she said, "The accident happened when I was 24. I kept my hands around my cup. "Yeah?" "Black ice. On I-65, coming back from a late session, I hit the guardrail. The door came in. She looked at her left hand on the table. 3 fingers, 2 surgeries, a year and a half of physical therapy. I stayed quiet. They said I'd regain most of the function, and I did, mostly, enough to play." She set her left hand flat on the table like she was pinning it there. Just not the way I played before. Not fast enough for session work, not clean enough for live performance, not good enough for the career I had been building. "But good enough to play at midnight," I said. She went still. "You heard that." "The walls are thin. I wasn't trying to." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "It's not the hand I hate. I've made peace with the hand. It's what the hand became, an excuse other people used. And then I started using it too." I didn't push her. She kept going on her own. "I had a writing partner," she said. "Finn Draper, we'd been writing together since before the accident. Good songs, real ones." Something in her jaw tightened. When I was in the hospital, then in recovery, he kept working, kept developing what we'd written together, except by the time he was presenting them, they were just his songs. He never said I wrote them. He never said I didn't. He just let the credit settle where it settled. I felt something tighten in my chest. I didn't let it show. She didn't need my anger right now. She'd already been carrying enough of her own. "One of them charted," she said. Moderately, but enough. He got a publishing deal out of it. He took what was yours, I said. She shook her head. He took what we both built. I just wasn't in the room when it got claimed. She looked at the wall. I told myself I'd fight it, that I'd reach out to the label, show the draft files, the dated voice memos. But I was still on medication, and I was so tired of fighting the hand and the recovery, and She stopped. I let it go. The rain pressed against the window. I let the silence hold. The worst part, she said, quieter now, was that he called me after, said he'd been thinking about me. Said he hoped I was healing okay, said if I ever wanted to get back into writing, he'd love to collaborate again. A short, humorless sound, like none of it had happened, like I was supposed to be grateful he'd remembered me at all. I looked at her. He didn't just take a song, I said. He took your name off it. She met my eyes. Something in her face opened and then came back, like a door that swings out a few inches and then returns. That's the right way to put it, she said. It's the true way. She picked up the new mug, looked into it. Most people say, at least you know you wrote it, at least it's out in the world, at least something you made actually mattered. That's what people say when they're more comfortable with your loss than you are. She laughed, quiet but real, the first actual laugh I'd heard from her. After that night, things changed by degrees. She made coffee for both of us in the mornings. The first time, mine was already on the counter when I came out. She didn't mention it. I didn't either. I fixed the sticky drawer in the kitchen, and she said, "Thank you," 2 words, fast, like she was testing whether saying them would cost her something. They didn't. She stopped putting her left hand in her pocket when we were in the same room. I noticed and kept noticing silently. Then the email came. She read it 3 times at her desk, her spine getting a little straighter with each pass, which I'd learned meant something was significant, and she hadn't decided yet whether to be glad about it. She closed the laptop. "What happened?" I asked. "Opportunity," she said. "The way you say the name of something you've decided not to trust." She turned the screen toward me. It was an invitation from a woman named Vivian Osgood, who ran the Gray Hill Sessions, a quarterly songwriter showcase at a venue in the Gulch. She'd heard one of Quinn's old demos through a mutual contact, she wrote, and wanted Quinn to perform 2 original songs at the upcoming show. Small, Vivian said, but carefully curated. People in the room tended to be people who mattered. She'd love Quinn to be there. "This is a real thing," I said. "I know." Vivian Osgood ran the sessions that launched at least 3 people I can name off the top of my head. "I know that, too." I looked at her. "So why do you look like you're reading a court summons?" She stood and went to the window. "Live performance," she said. "With my hand the way it is, under pressure, in front of people who are actually paying attention." She stopped. "I can't guarantee it won't fall apart in front of a room that matters." "Can't or might?" She turned around. "What?" "Can't is a fact, might is a fear wearing a fact's clothes. They're not the same thing." Her expression sharpened. "Don't do that." "I'm asking a real question," I said. "You don't have to answer it right now." She looked at her left hand, said nothing. I said, "If you want to go, I'll drive you. If something goes wrong mid-song and you want to leave, tell me and I'll have the car at the curb in 3 minutes. If you want to stay through the whole thing, I'll be somewhere in the room. None of those are my decisions. You know that better than I do." She didn't answer that night. In the morning, the invitation was open on her screen again. She went. She wore a dark blue dress and low boots and her hair back, not trying to disappear, not performing a confidence she didn't have. Just dressed, just going. On the drive, she sat with her hands in her lap. Her left hand was completely still. I kept the radio low. Halfway there, she said, "What if it's bad?" "Then it's bad," I said. "You go home. You decide later if you want to try again or not. That's a decision that exists on the other side of tonight." She exhaled slowly, watched Nashville go past in the dark. "Okay," she said, quiet, like she was agreeing with herself more than with me. The venue was a converted warehouse space, exposed brick, low warm lighting, a small stage with a single spot, and a bench piano, maybe 60 people. Quinn stood at the entrance, and I watched her entire body tighten when she looked at the crowd. "Breathe," I said, very low. "I am breathing." "You're doing something, but it's closer to bracing." She glanced sideways at me. "Are you going to be like this the whole night?" "Probably." She almost smiled. That small, not quite their smile pulled her back into herself enough to take the first step inside. She stayed near the back wall until her name was called. I stood a few feet away, close enough that she could feel I was there, far enough that I wasn't crowding her corner. Then I saw her face change. She'd gone still in a different way, the way you go still when you see something you hadn't braced for. I followed her line of sight. Across the room, just arrived with two other people, was a man in his mid-30s in a nice jacket, and the easy posture of someone who considered himself exactly the right kind of person to be seen at events like this. He saw her before she could look away. He came over. "Quinn." His voice had a warmth to it that sounded practiced. "Didn't know you were going to be here? This is great." "Finn," she said, flat. Finn Draper looked around the room like he was noting she'd made a good choice. "Performing tonight?" "Yes." "That's brave." He said it genuinely, which was the part that made it worse. And then his eyes went to her left hand, just a flicker. He was too careful to linger. But it happened. "I mean that," he said. "After everything you've been through to get back out there and—" "She's on in a few minutes," I said. He looked at me, his smile recalibrated. "Friend of yours?" Quinn glanced at me, not asking me to take over, just checking I was still there. "I'm someone who knows what he's listening to," I said. One of the people with Finn had his phone half raised, angled in Quinn's direction. I took one step toward him and said quietly, "Put that away." He blinked. I was just, "Put it away." He did. Finn looked at me the way people look when they're recalculating without enough information. I turned to Quinn. 8 minutes. You don't have to stand here." She held Finn's gaze for one more second. Then she walked toward the stage. She sat at the bench. The room settled into quiet around her. She looked down at the keys for a moment. Then she played. The first few bars were careful. I watched her left hand. The slight adjustment in the harder passage, the moment where the pinky barely caught the note, and she shifted without stopping, reaching with the ring finger instead. The music didn't break. It moved around the obstacle the way water moves around a stone, and you wouldn't have noticed unless you were looking for it. By the second song, she wasn't compensating anymore. She was playing the way the song wanted to be played. Her hand was in it completely, moving through what it could, working around what it couldn't, and the room had gone the kind of quiet that happens when something real is actually occurring in front of you. Vivian Osgood stood against the back wall, with her arms crossed and her chin lifted, the expression of someone who had come expecting something decent and was getting something more than that. When Quinn finished, the applause started immediately, not polite, real. Vivian found her before Quinn had fully stood from the bench. They were in the corner near the entrance for almost 20 minutes. I stayed across the room. I could see Quinn's face from where I was, the wariness she'd walked in with slowly becoming something else. A kind of surprised steadiness, like someone who had spent so long bracing for the floor to give way that they'd forgotten what solid ground felt like. When she came to find me, she said, "She wants my songs, not to perform, to place with other artists, behind the scenes with my name on them, or in front if I decide I want that later." I said, "That sounds like exactly what you should be doing." Her eyes were bright. She didn't cry. She said she heard the demo and thought I had something most writers are missing. She stopped, swallowed. She said the songs sound like they were written by someone who understands what it costs to say something true. I held that. She's right. Quinn looked down at her left hand. I kept thinking the hand was going to ruin it. The hand showed up and played music, same as the rest of you. She shook her head slowly, not disagreeing, just taking it in. Finn left sometime while Quinn was talking with Vivian. No confrontation, no parting words. Just a man who realized the room had reorganized itself around a different center, and he wasn't it. We stood outside after, on the sidewalk, under a thin, cold sky. Quinn had her coat on and her hands in her pockets. She looked the way people look after something they'd been dreading, turns out to have been survivable. Like the relief is so large it fills exactly the same space the fear did. "I almost didn't come," she said. "I know. You didn't push me. It wasn't my call." She turned and looked at me. The streetlight was on one side of her face. She wasn't performing anything, wasn't guarding anything, just looking at me. "But you stayed in the room," she said. "That part was my call," I said. "That one I made." She held my eyes for a long moment. Then she turned back to the street, and I saw the smallest thing happen at the corner of her mouth. We drove home quiet, not the heavy kind, The kind that comes after a long day when nothing needs to be said anymore, when the work is done and you can just be in the same space moving through the same dark. Back at the apartment, she didn't turn things off the way she usually did. She switched on the tall lamp in the living room, the one she always said threw light at an angle she didn't like, and left it on. Sat at the kitchen table. Her left hand rested on the surface, slightly curved at rest in the ordinary light of the kitchen. No audience, no reason to hide it. She just let it be there. I kept thinking, she said eventually, that if I could just get the hand back to exactly where it was, I could get everything else back too. The career, the sessions, all of it. She looked at it. But I don't think that's true anymore. The hand I have now is the one I'm working with, and that's the actual situation. Yeah, I said. I stayed in that room tonight. You did. A quiet pause. Not because I wasn't scared. I was scared the whole time. I know. Being scared and being stupid aren't the same thing. No, I said. They're not. She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, they were clear. Not healed. I don't think that's a thing that happens in one night, but clear. Like she could see the distance in front of her and had decided it was worth measuring. The next morning was a Tuesday. I came into the kitchen still not quite awake, and Quinn was already at the piano. Not the careful, late-night tentative version, just playing, the way you play when you're not performing for anyone. When the music is simply a thing that happens between you and the room, and whatever you're working out in your own head. I made coffee. I set her cup on the edge of the piano the way I'd started doing without deciding to, and went back to the table with my drawings. She kept playing. At some point, she stopped without turning around. You know, she said, most people would have asked about the hand by now. I was waiting for you to bring it up. I brought it up weeks ago. I meant the other parts, I said. The ones you hadn't said out loud yet. She was quiet for a moment. Then she started playing again. Slowly, something I hadn't heard before. A melody still being figured out, still deciding what it wanted to be. I kept my eyes on my drawings, but I was listening. Months later, she signed with Vivian's management company. Her name went on to 2 place songs the following quarter. Not huge, but real and visible, and hers. She started taking video calls with co-writers she never would have agreed to a year before. She went to a workshop and came home complaining that someone had refused to cut a lyric that was killing the second verse. And I realized halfway through her frustration that she'd stayed until the very end. She performed again once at a small venue in East Nashville. I drove her and stood near the back. She didn't look for me during the set. Once, between songs, she glanced toward the back of the room, and I nodded once, and she turned back to the audience. That was enough. That was exactly enough. The first time she kissed me was in the kitchen, in the middle of an argument about whether a piano placed against an exterior wall changes the sound in a meaningful way. I said it depends entirely on the insulation. She said, that's not the point. I said, what is the point? She said, the point is, and then she stopped talking and looked at me. I want to kiss you, she said. I stayed still, because I finally agreed about the insulation. Don't make it weird. Okay. She looked at me. Can I? Yes, I said. Can I? She nodded, and that was that. No swelling music, no rain conveniently arriving, just the hum of the old refrigerator and the smell of coffee and her hand, her left hand, brushing lightly against my wrist like she was making sure I was actually there. We moved into a larger apartment 6 months later. 2 real bedrooms, a kitchen big enough for 2 people with strong opinions, a north-facing room that became hers. Piano, audio interface, 2 monitors, lyric sheets pinned to a corkboard in layers, my acoustic panels lined up against one wall, waiting for the next project. On the wall above her desk, she hung a single framed page, a handwritten lyric sheet from a song she'd never played for anyone. Not her most successful placed song, not her most technically impressive, just the one she'd been the most afraid of, the one she'd written in the months right after the accident, alone when she thought she was done. She put it up because it was hers, because some things deserve to be seen just because they exist. Someone asked me once, at a gathering at Harlow Records, why I loved her. Quinn was across the room talking with a co-writer, left hand moving as she spoke, slightly curved at rest, catching the late afternoon light. I watched her for a second before I answered. Because she puts everything true into what she makes, I said. And I hate that the world once convinced her that wasn't worth claiming. The person nodded. After a moment, I added, also she has very strong opinions about where a piano belongs in a room, and she's wrong, and she knows it. From across the room, which is not as far away as it sounds, Quinn said, I heard that. I know. I'm not wrong. You're objectively wrong. She smiled, didn't cover her hand, didn't look away. And I thought about the first night I stood at apartment 4B with my bag and a scam listing on my phone and no plan left. And she opened the door and told me that none of her roommates had lasted. And I said, okay. She had been warning me. And she had also been, I think, hoping I wasn't the kind of person she'd have to warn. Turns out she was right about that, even if she won't say it out loud.